if you made a movie about a single moment in Alabama football history, I think it would have to. This is the number one on the list. It's an incredible thing to have happened, and to have witnessed it. It felt unreal watching it. It felt like there's no way something this storybook can actually happen.
Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon. Hi, welcome to Beat Everyone. I am Ben Flanagan with AL.com. I am joined here with our good friend and Beat Everyone producer, Matt Scalici. And it's the holidays, Matt. Everybody's got their wish list for what they want for Christmas or the holidays or however you do things in your household. But, we're thinking about the presents that we already got over the years as Alabama fans. We're a spoiled bunch here at Beat Everyone and throughout the state and really throughout the world because Alabama's a global brand, Matt. But it's been good to say the least. Santa has delivered, so to speak. And you and I are going to talk about some of those things that have been extra special to Alabama fans, maybe when the regular season is over. Isn't that right?
That's right, Ben. We're being visited by the ghost of Christmas past for us today, and we're going to be looking at the 12 best plays from the postseason for Alabama. Now, we're limiting this to the Saban era, which gives us plenty of material to work with, but you and I are going to do 6 each. We're gonna try to avoid overlapping, but these are our picks for basically our favorite moments from the postseason for the past, decade and a half plus of Alabama football.
Yeah, nearly 2 decades.
Yeah, it's a lot to cover, Ben. I'm gonna throw my first one out there, and I'm going with a moment that it's first of all, it's crazy how many of these were so high stakes. There's truly no other program that could build a list like this. This would be the number one moment of all time for probably 98% of college football programs. I am going with Kenyan Drake's kick return from the 2015 national championship game. Kenyan Drake can fly, I believe, was the call from Chris Fowler on the broadcast. A moment that is so loaded with context that I couldn't go through it all here with you, but it's not just when it happened in the game, which effectively made it feel like a game-winning play when it happened. It's probably the most spectacular thing that can happen in a football game, period, which is a long kick return touchdown. It's the fact that it was a guy who had gone through multiple injuries that could have been career-ending for a lot of other players. And here he is, like, doing the most athletic thing you can imagine somebody doing. It was such a cool emotional moment for Kenyan Drake, but on top of it, it was that moment where you realized Alabama was going to win a national championship the year after, or a couple of years removed, which felt like an eternity at that point from winning their previous national title.
You're coming in hot here with the first pick. You're right. I mean, that's one of the greatest plays in Alabama history and college football history, I think. I mean, it was so cool for Kenyan Drake, too, specifically, that it happened to him, a guy who had been relegated to backup duty at his position because of all the talent that Alabama had and because of a number of the injuries that Kenyan Drake had suffered. So for him to get a moment like that when the stakes couldn't be higher and to do it the way that he did, to soar towards the pylon with the ball, barely hanging onto the ball as he touched it and put Alabama up a couple of scores. Amazing. So
one of the great moments in pylon cam history, I would say also.
100%. Yeah. Great. That's one of those where you're just like, oh, there's a Daniel Moore painting right there. There it is. We just watched it. And sure enough, it became one. So, okay, since you took one from that game, I'm gonna take one from that game so it doesn't get stolen, because this moment was arguably just as important to Alabama's success. That game was all about momentum, and Nick Saban, I think, talked a lot about like the momentum of the game, and Clemson had a lot of it at this moment when Saban decided out of nowhere, nobody expected this, but for Alabama to kick an onside kick where Adam Griffith lined it up, saw something in the film in the Clemson return game leading up to it, and he kicks a pop fly that Marlon Humphrey intercepts as he runs out of bounds, sending everybody, especially Dabo Swinney, into an absolute frenzy the moment that happened. I'd never seen an onside kick like that before. You always see these teams kick it into the ground, hoping that they get the ball to hop through the air and give the recovering team a chance in such a low percentage outcome most of the time. And Alabama just worked it like a charm, like they had been running that play for years, just executed it to perfection. We even got that wry smile from Nick Saban as the camera cut to him on the sideline, like he couldn't even believe that it worked. But Alabama snatched the momentum back from Clemson and ultimately won the game in large part because they took as big a risk as I've ever seen Nick Saban take at Alabama.
Ben, a future episode of this podcast could be the best in-game coaching decisions from Nick Saban ever, and this would be on the list. This also might be the only, and I know I'm wrong about this, doesn't it feel like this is the only time you've ever seen Alabama recover an onside kick?
Oh, for sure. I mean, there may have.
It always
been others,
happens against Alabama.
Yeah,
I don't remember any other than this that Alabama actually got it.
Yeah, and it's weird that I haven't seen an onside kick like it really since then either. That pop fly onside kick.
Yeah,
like the same way. I guess people saw that and were like, "That's never happening to us."
Yeah, pretty great moment for sure. All right, I am moving on for my next one. I am going with, I would say, one of the moments that started it all for the Saban era. There are probably several moments you could pick from that 2009 national championship game. I was at the game, and the moment that to me made it feel real, made it feel like, wow, Alabama's going to win, was the Marcel Darius pick six that happened right before halftime. It was shocking, not just because of the individual play, but the fact that it was one of those moments where you look up at the scoreboard and said, is this actually happening right now? Is Alabama really kind of running away with a national championship game? And it was if you watch it now, an incredible feat of athleticism from a guy that's what people remember about Marcel Darius, a huge body that moved like a ballerina sometimes. And that play is probably the perfect example of it.
Yeah, I think our friend Eli Gold, his call said that he pirouetted out of that pick six towards the end zone. Good word for it. Amazing. Alabama goes up 24-6 at half at that point, and it just seems like they're never going to look back.
It wasn't over, but it really did feel like Texas couldn't come back from that.
I assume you're not picking anything else from 2009 then. If you picked that.
That's my only pick from that game.
Okay, well, from that game, yeah, another one would have been probably the Eric Anders blindside sack of the freshman quarterback whose name escapes me right now, Garrett Gilbert. But I'm actually going with something from 2009, and I bet you wanted to pick this potentially because you said not from that game. I'm going with the Javier Arenas interception in the SEC championship game, where Javier Arenas snatches a Tim Tebow pass out of the air as it's going to what you thought was a wide open receiver in the back of the end zone. And that to me was just, it solidified Alabama's standing in that game as they're going to win this thing and they're going to do it in dominating fashion. But Javier Arenas, one of our all-time favorite players of the Saban era in any era at Alabama, just making a play like that where it just looks like he is extending himself to win, right? Like you just saw competitive spirit in the guy as he was making that play, getting that interception, not game sealing necessarily, but very close to it. And it was just such an awesome moment that I think took everybody's breath away, especially Urban Meyer.
And one of the great dragon slaying moments in sports, I would say, this larger than life figure that had dominated the sport in a way that basically people don't do anymore because they're not around long enough to do it. But it's for people who weren't watching college football at the time, hard to understand how predominant of a figure Tim Tebow was in college football. It was to the point where he was discussed in every broadcast of every game, whether Florida was playing in the game or not. He was college football. And that was the moment that basically ended his college dominance. An incredible career regardless. But it's not something that you see a lot in college football now, where these absolutely huge figures that feel almost bigger than the sport itself, uh, and how cathartic to watch Alabama take him down to, I mean, famously, the famous image, only a few seconds after that play, Ben, the camera cut to Tim Tebow with tears in his eyes on the sideline. Just a like narratively incredible moment in college football.
That image that everybody then somehow in 2009 photoshopped onto college football PlayStation game covers
back then.
Yeah. But like the PlayStation cover that year, people like Alabama fans were so quick to, and then,
yes.
Those ridiculous sayings like Florida tried, Tebow cried, roll Tide. One of the gumpiest moments in Alabama's.
That's a great way to put it. Gumpiest moment. Yeah.
All right. Your third pick, Matt.
My third pick is actually coming from a semifinal game. I'm finally breaking out of the national championship pattern here. This is from 2017, and it's from a semifinal that rarely Alabama was not expected to win. Alabama was the lower seed heading into the game against Clemson in the Sugar Bowl. I don't think a lot of people thought Alabama had it in them. I think they all had Alabama sneaks into the playoffs. Everybody kind of figures this just ain't one of those good teams for Alabama. They don't have it all put together. And they get in that game against Clemson. The defense has a spectacular game, but importantly, the offense finds a way to score, an offense that had really struggled in the latter half of that season. And we see them bring in big old Daron Payne into the backfield as a fullback, which we had seen a couple of times during the season, but not used in this way when he flares out into the flats and Jalen Hurts throws a touchdown pass to Daron Payne. Two guys who are having very successful NFL careers now, but it felt like a fun, silly, unexpected underdog kind of moment for Alabama, and there's not too many that have that feel to them.
Yep, great play. It was on my short list, Matt. Daron Payne even having the wherewithal to get both feet in bounds had he been in the NFL. So looking pretty agile for a guy his size. A lot of defensive lineman touchdowns on your list.
I love it. It's one of the most fun things to see is to see an absolutely huge guy doing something that is very athletic. That look, I couldn't do anything that any player on the team does. But to watch a guy that weighs, 350 pounds doing some of this stuff, it's one of my favorite things about football.
I would never say fat guy touchdown, Matt.
I haven't called them fat at any point. I think they're beautiful.
I'm saying I would never say that. Okay, my next one, I'm actually going to go back in time just a little bit, a little after the one that I picked before. I'm going to the 2011 game, the Alabama LSU BCS National Championship game, and famously Alabama held LSU from crossing the 50 for most of the game. They crossed it one time, and my play is when Alabama sacked Justin Jefferson and flung him back across the 50 after the first time and only time they crossed it. And you had guys like Dante Hightower and Nick Gentry, one of the forgotten great players in Alabama history. But you had a historic Alabama defense just put on. It was one of arguably Nick Saban's defensive masterpiece while he was the head coach at Alabama. And to me, that moment where they finally cross it and then they just get thrown right back across the 50 was just so symbolic of not only that defense, but Alabama just making a statement as being the true national champions that year when a lot of people didn't think they belonged because they had lost to LSU earlier in the season in the game of the century. Alabama just with an emphatic statement, and the defense is just one of the all-time greats in that moment. To me, signified it more than anything.
Yeah, and one of the important moments in college football history, because that game generally is probably why the college football decided to go to a 4-team playoff, and now they've decided to go to another format to try to keep Alabama from getting into the postseason.
Because they hate Bama. It's because they hate Bama, Matt.
They're trying to keep them down. Ben, I just had for my previous play a Jalen Hurts play. Maybe I've just had Jalen on the brain because I've been enjoying watching him this season with the Eagles. I've got another Jalen Hurts postseason moment, and to me, this is the best one. And I think it will be forgotten by a lot of people because it came in a season that Alabama didn't win a national championship. But to me, one of the single greatest individual performances and moments that I've ever seen on a football field. And I get pretty cynical about this stuff. I've been to a lot of games. I've been covering college football for a long time. I feel like I've seen it all. And this moment made me have that sort of wonder again about sports and about college football. But it was the 2018 SEC championship game. Alabama goes into the game as heavy favorites and goes up against Georgia a year after the national championship game. Tua Tagovailoa is struggling and ultimately gets injured in that game. Jalen Hurts, who stuck around and didn't transfer when almost anybody else probably would have in his position, comes into the game and saves the day with an incredible performance, throwing the ball and running the ball. Two touchdowns that are as good as any touchdown play made by any quarterback in Alabama football history. One passing, one rushing. Just an unbelievable moment given all of the story leading up to it. If you made a movie about a single moment in Alabama football history, I think it would have to. This is the number one on the list. It's an incredible thing to have happened, and to have witnessed it. It felt unreal watching it. It felt like there's no way something this storybook can actually happen.
It was unbelievable. I was in the building too, covering it. I was photographing the game for AL.com, and Jalen Hurts just had this ability, this unusual knack, just to kind of like let the air out of the balloon when he finally broke loose for scrambled or just darted for a touchdown run when nobody expected it. You know, you think about that LSU game in 2016, I believe it was, when it was 10-0. You think about when he nearly won the national championship for Alabama against Clemson in 2016, which we could have put on this list too. You know, maybe had the outcome been a little different, but you're right. In that game, it's storybook stuff, man. Like, it's just reverse of the previous season. Just the unselfish nature of Hurts to stick around and develop as a backup essentially, and wait until his number was called. And to make not just that play where he ran it in, which Jalen Hurts does, but he made some big throws in that game too. Touchdown passes, one to Jerry Jeudy late in the game. He found Irv Smith at one point. He found Jalen Waddle for a leaping catch on the sideline at one point. So just an all-around game from Jalen Hurts.
Go back and watch the Jeudy touchdown pass in that game. It is truly, I mean, it's NFL level stuff. It's incredible.
He's rolling out right, and he's finding Jeudy just streaking across the back of the end zone, and it just unbelievable. And also, like, when you're in that stadium when a team scores in the SEC championship, this train whistle blows.
That's right.
And I remember when that train whistle blew after Jalen Hurts had been like thrown by his the back of his shoulder pads, essentially by his neck into the end zone. It was like your chest was caving in.
He stands up. He does the Superman pull the shirt open, and then the train horn is blaring. It really, I mean, I think we were both standing in that end zone, Ben, and I just remember being like, "How is this happening?
Yeah,
How is this real?"
Great pick, Matt. Arguably, it's one of the best ever, even though Alabama didn't even win the national championship. Hurts coming in and securing the SEC championship and getting them to the playoff that way. Truly remarkable. I'll stick with the same game. The same season. I'll go 2018, what was 2019, played in 2019 in the Orange Bowl. And this is not like as significant as a player. I just liked the play a lot because it happened right in front of me. I was standing on the sideline, and this Josh Jacobs trucking an Oklahoma defender on a catch and run in the Orange Bowl against Oklahoma. Just like that was like joyless murder ball in its most pure form to me, because he just catches the ball. A couple of Oklahoma secondary guys are just standing around, and he just flat out runs over a guy. And I just remember hearing the crunch of the plastic helmets as one guy goes backwards and one guy just walks into the end zone. Josh Jacobs, to me, I don't think he's underrated at this point. The guy's a great starting NFL running back, but the fact that guy was never the starter at running back for Alabama in the Nick Saban era, to me, is just one of the biggest mysteries that I can remember. But yeah, it's that's off the top of my head. That's just one of my favorite postseason moments. Josh Jacobs just obliterating Oklahoma.
Great play. I remember that one from being in the press box and hearing a normally silent press box, which is what it's typically like when you're watching a game in there. Hearing everyone basically make the sound oof, like all the wind coming out of everybody watching it. Just a shockingly physically dominant moment for a relatively small guy like Josh Jacobs. I've got another one of, speaking of people getting the wind knocked out of them, Ben. I'm going with a play from that perfect 2020 season for Alabama. This is from the SEC championship game when John Metchie blasted a Florida defensive back and forced a fumble following an interception that gave Alabama the ball back and gave them a first down in that game. And it honestly, it was fairly significant in the game. Probably the only game the entire season that Alabama was actually challenged in 2020. It was very back and forth. Nobody could stop anybody else from scoring in that game. So every possession really mattered and really counted. And Florida could have come back in that game with a turnover. And John Metchie just absolutely decleated this guy. One of the most fun things I've ever seen a wide receiver do for Alabama.
Yeah, and Mac Jones, I forget which tight end it was, so I'm not going to name them by name, but they essentially dropped a Mac Jones pass, and it became an interception, tip ball interception. And then you're right, Metchie just blasts the dude. But one of the best parts of that play is Devonta Smith, Johnny on the spot, jumps on the ball as soon as it's loose and recovers it for Alabama. I saw he did that in an Eagles game recently when A.J. Brown just got smashed by this guy, and then same thing, balls on the ground. Devonta Smith, the dude's just got a nose for the ball. You're right, amazing, and that's one of the inspiration for one of the great University of Alabama football athletics department post-game posters that they created. Just really, really good stuff back when they were making those. My next one is going to involve Devonta Smith in 2020 from that season, actually, and it's in the national championship game. And it's when Devonta Smith is being covered by a middle linebacker at one point in the game. When this is the arguably one of the most unguardable receivers in college football history, and then suddenly Alabama's Steve Sarkisian just schemes this play where this poor guy gets matched up on Devonta Smith of all people. And I think there were maybe 30 yards between the two of them by the time Devonta Smith caught this ball and then just gallops into the end zone like a gazelle for, I think, maybe his second or third touchdown. He already had 200 yards, I think, at that point in the first half, in Alabama just dominating Ohio State, who only played half a season during the COVID year anyway. But so they were no match. I mean, they were just a killing machine, that team. I said joyless murder ball earlier. I mean, I think ESPN had a list recently, the greatest teams in the college football playoff era, and that 2020 team was number one on the list, and for good reason. They just seemed unbeatable, even though, like you said, Florida gave them a run for their money, or Ole Miss did earlier in the season, but there was just no stopping that offense. They were going to gain every yard that they were tasked with gaining in 2020. So fantastic. All right, Matt, what's your last one?
Ben, my last one is probably fairly obvious. It's the best play in arguably Alabama football history, maybe the best play in college football history in terms of the stakes, in terms of the drama of it, and how much it mattered in the moment. I'm going with 2nd and 26 for Alabama in overtime versus Georgia in the national championship game 2017. A moment that I think everybody's already seen a million times, but it doesn't make it less impressive and less dramatic. It's an incredible thing that I think you could only witness something like that with the team that you root for. If your team has been given a million reps in high stakes championship level games, and the coach has the confidence and the knowledge and the wisdom and the brass to say, you know what, I got to change quarterbacks at halftime of the national championship game, despite my quarterback not being injured. An incredibly bold thing to do. I don't think a coach that doesn't already have, 5 national championships on his resume at that school would ever do something like that. It takes a level of self-assuredness that only Nick Saban could ever have to make a decision like that. And it didn't look like it was necessarily going to pay off right away. And even the play before it, it's the kind of thing that a freshman would do. It's a freshman mistake to take a sack like that in overtime. And Saban himself has said, I was about to kill him after that play. And he comes back out and shows the talent and the confidence that we know Tua Tagovailoa for today, that we still can see him out there doing, for the Miami Dolphins on Sundays right now. Just a guy who has such power and such quickness and such confidence in everything that he does, throwing to a guy who would one day win a Heisman Trophy, who was also a freshman at the time. Just a remarkable moment to walk off a national championship game like that against a conference opponent. What an incredible moment.
It's the best play in the history of college football, Matt. I mean, I could get cute here and name something else as like the number one play in Alabama postseason history, and people could say, well, the kick six and the Stanford band and, all these things. And it's like, those are all great plays, like undeniably. This was a walk-off bomb touchdown pass for the national championship. Like, how does it get any bigger than that? 41-yard pass, freshman phenom throwing it, unexpected narrative or story for the entire game, season, everything's on the line. Like, it's just as good as it could possibly get. They showed this on SEC Network the other night, and I watched it, and I was reliving the entire game, and all the anxiety and stress were bubbling back up again. I mean, this is also a play that shouldn't have even happened, Matt. As you may recall, Alabama had this game sewn up at the end of regulation. At the end of regulation, they had a short gimme field goal, chip shot field goal lined up. Jalen Hurts comes back into the game to help line the ball up down the middle of the field so that Alabama's kicker, Andy Pappanastis, can just end it with like 3 seconds left on the clock.
We didn't have to name him, Ben. That feels a little...
Look, this is history. I don't blame Pappanastis necessarily. I'm just saying, like, these things happen. I'm not blaming the kid, but kids miss kicks all the time. But and thankfully it got erased very quickly. But improbable moment. And I say this often too, that it wasn't just Tua's origin story. It was Devonta Smith's, right? I mean, Tua was the star that night, and for good reason. But remember who caught the pass, and like you said, remember who went on to have arguably the best season that anyone's ever had at Alabama in Devonta Smith. So
it was funny. I remember at the end of the game asking who had caught the touchdown. We couldn't really see it from the sidelines. And it just was not. I mean, I knew who Devonta Smith was because he had made a game-winning play against Mississippi State a couple of weeks prior to that. But it still was like he was not the guy that you thought.
No, he only had like 280 yards receiving that year. So he was not a household name by any stretch.
Yeah,
but he would be. All right, well, Matt, I'm going to run through, some quick honorable mentions. I mentioned the Eric Anders sack against Texas. I had here dragging Kirk Cousins' face across the turf in 2010 in the Capital One Bowl.
I have one from that game too, Ben. I have Greg McElroy throwing a block for Julio Jones on an
That's a good one. The Amari Cooper deep ball against Georgia in 2012, another classic game.
Yeah,
OJ Howard is wide open in 2015. Jake Coker finding him a couple of times. Bo Scarborough's like 80-yard touchdown run in 2016 against Washington in the semifinal. I've got Jamison Williams outrunning the entire Georgia defense in 2021's SEC championship game. And in 2023, honestly, Jalen Milroe played such a great game. Just the guy running out the clock on Kirby Smart in Georgia, but he threw a beautiful wheel route pass to Jam Miller for a touchdown in that game that was just gorgeous and controlled the game. So shout out Jalen Milroe.
Good picks. Lots to choose from for sure. And hopefully Alabama will have some promising additions to this list as we move out of the Saban era into whatever comes next, Ben. But that's our 12 days, or excuse me, our 12 plays of Christmas.
It was going to be 13, but we saved a spot for the ReliaQuest Bowl coming up, and whatever happens in that game goes in that spot. We know something special is going to happen in Tampa.
History waiting to be made there in Orlando.
Nobody forgets
Tampa,
the ReliaQuest
Tampa.
Bowl.
I'm sorry. I couldn't even remember what city it's in.
All right, you can find Beat Everyone wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, everywhere. Rate, subscribe, review. It really helps us out. And thanks so much, Matt Scalici, our Beat Everyone producer, for joining us. And we just want to send a very special happy holidays to everybody. Be safe. Have fun. We'll see you soon. Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon.